Hello everybody and welcome to my tutorial and overview of the Synapse Audio Obsession synthesizer. The purpose of this tutorial is to go specifically over this synthesizer and not necessarily about the actual aspects of subtractive synthesis itself, generally speaking. So I'm going to assume that you already understand what a filter, cutoff, resonance, envelope, and other different things like that do. And I'm going to kind of proceed from there, particularly because this synthesizer is not very complicated, but it can get a little bit in depth. So this may not be the best starter sound design synth um, for you. But if you're a bit familiar with synthesizers, you shouldn't have too much of a problem. So one of the interesting things about this synthesizer, the first thing of note, what makes it unique versus just about every other synthesizer you're going to find, especially software, hardware, anything, is the way that these it's based on Oberheim synthesizers, and the way that they often work is in order to have their polyphonic mechanism, they actually have a full stack of voices. And as you can see here, there's voice adjustment, edit, and mute and active. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And you can actually go to 16 voices, all the way out to 16 or 8. And what these are is actually individual synthesizers in every single voice. And that's quite interesting. It's like a stack of synthesizers. Like you have 8 of them. So if you have like 8 monophonic synths and you kind of hook it up so like each next key plays the next synth, and they all have similar options, but each one is just a little bit kind of off. But you can like play chords on it. That's kind of how it works. And then there's also a single and dual mode and split mode, which kind of takes it further into a deeper like change of the actual panels. Like you would split it up, and if you just in single, each one of these parameters is like pretty close to the same patch, just a little bit off. And if you split it into like a dual or a split, you can actually take like half of them and put it on something that's way different, and the other half on something way different, and then play like 2 separate patches either on top of each other or split across the keyboard. And sorry, some of my knobs are moving here. I'm actually having some automation running in the background from a prior recording. So don't mind that. If I didn't bring it up, it didn't do anything. Anyway, so right now, I'm going to just initialize the patch. And here's your patch browser. As you can see, it's got a lot of different preset banks. And then there's init patch. Now, I just deleted a lot of mine, but you have this init 8-voice saw, which just creates an initialized patch with 8 voices versus the 16 that I just brought up. So the voices, again, that's like individual synthesizers stacked. And it's like a MIDI chain. If you like have analog synthesizers, you can think of it like that. Of like you stack 3, then you can get 3 voices and play 3-note chords and things like that. So this automatically comes with 8 or 16. So that's kind of the distinguishing factor of the Obsession versus almost every other kind of synthesizer you're going to find. And I'm going to go more into depth on that. So now you see, like, here's where you get your single, which is just like every voice is basically fine-tuned around a single sound. Dual is you split the voices half and half into completely different sounds for one half and completely different sounds for another half. And then across those 2 halves, like the 4 and 4 or the 8 and 8, if you pick 8 or 16, are fine-tuned. And then split is like you have completely different voices, but you don't play them at the same time. But one plays on the bottom half of the keyboard and one plays on the top. So let's say you had a 16 voice like this, and then you have a split. So 1 through 8 will be playing like a bass patch on your lower registers. And then 9 through 16, it would be playing a treble patch, like a keyboard sound or a lead on your higher registers. That's how the split works. And then each one of those would be kind of just finely tuned across a similar patch. And you'll see later about the fine tuning and what I'm talking about regarding that. So we'll just go back to 8-voice single. All right, so this is kind of your starting point. You go to initialize 8-voice saw. You do the single, and basically now you're kind of looking at a very normal synthesizer in many ways. Now, just to go through the sections real quick here. Pitch bend mod wheel, PB, MW, right? I'm sure you know what that is. You can control it with the mouse or with your MIDI keyboard like I'm doing right now. Control, you have portamento, right here. This is Unison. The Unison button, what that does actually is, let's say you have like, when you're normally running this, like this, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, however I run it. You see how it's running right here? It's showing you the lights. So it runs one voice at a time. And if you play multiple notes like this, it grabs, randomly, or in some given order, however many voices I'm playing, right? So that's how that works. And what the Unison does is actually going to make it quite a bit louder, because it's gonna take all 8 voices or whatever voices are active, and it's gonna play them all at once like this. And you can make kind of like a super saw sound or like a big wide sound with that, and I'll show you how to do it later. But that's what the Unison does. Okay. And then this oscillator 2 detune. Right now it's at 0 and it goes plus and minus. So down in the oscillators, you have oscillator 1 and you have oscillator 2 frequency. Oscillator 1 is like your basic frequency. Oscillator 2 is your secondary oscillator frequency. And this is the fine tuning control. So this is semitones and this is fine tuning control for oscillator 2. So if you have 2 oscillators, and I'm going to go over this next, but you have 2 oscillators running, like 2 sawtooth waves. If you do this down here, there's your semitone, but this is your fine tune, so you have that spread. And again, that goes up and down. The X mod, this is basically like ring modulation, frequency modulation. It sounds to me like frequency modulation, but it's just a little bit, it's got its own unique sound to it. And you'll see it's for bells and things like that, are kind of, basic FM sounds that are atonal, or it can just be used to introduce some grit or other kind of like artifacts into a sound to make it a little more interesting at low amounts. So that's the control, Unison, portamento, and oscillator 2 detune. Then next here you have the common master section. And basically what this is just the master tuning. So that's just like a master tuning knob for the whole synthesizer to get it in tune. Like some patches, you'll start building a patch and it kind of, based on your tunings, it'll go sharp or flat or different things you're doing. So that's how you can kind of bring it back into the right pitch. It's just using the master tuning. Spread, this is panning actually. So this is a panning spread left and right in your stereo channels of these voices. And it's kind of random in a way, but the more you spread it out, the more each voice plays like left and right further apart. So like if you're listening on a stereo system, you'll hear right now, you see it's going through just mono 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. But if you go to spread all the way, see it alternates between left and right channels. You put it like somewhere right here, you get a kind of like a spread effect. You can do it more or less. More is kind of like an effect, and less is just to bring a little bit of interest. And then this is your master volume right here. All right. That's pretty obvious for what that is. There's your MIDI in that just shows that you're getting a MIDI note. LFOs, right here, LFO, you have 1 and 2, so you have 2 LFOs. Each one of them have a separate rate and shape and depth parameter. So right now they look the same, but you'll see that if I actually change the rate, and you can see it's in hertz here, there's actually a way to sync it, but that's a little bit further on the back panel. I'll show you later. But the rate, for example, I bring LFO 1 rate down a little bit, and then if I go to LFO 2, you can see that one is now at the center. So let's say I bring that one up, that one down. Okay. Sine wave, square wave, sample and hold. This is like a random kind. It can go from like a random to more like a noise if it's really fast, but it's like a randomized pattern, just like R2D2. And then this one right here is kind of interesting because this is where you can get your modulations in time with the sequencer you're running. So now you switch from milliseconds to like eighth notes, half notes, you know, and like bars and so forth. You can see it right there, and that's relating. If you press tab, actually no, not tab, I'm sorry, it's this button right here in the upper right hand corner. There's a back panel, and it's running. You see LFO steps, so I'll go over that later, but this is basically controlling, like you can draw it in like this or with the line, for example, and it's actually controlling. You see LFO 1 and there's LFO 2. Right now I selected LFO 1, so it's running because I selected on LFO 1 this pattern, and I did not select it on LFO 2. If I did, then you would see it's also running on LFO 2 based on the rate that I selected. You see that? Okay, so it's like another LFO shape, as you can see. Sine, square, sample, and hold. And this is the third shape on the back panel that can be drawn in. And it can actually be drawn in some complicated ways, and I'll go over that more when you go in the back panel. But this is your LFO depth right here, and this is just what it is modulating. So like, this is pretty straightforward. Oscillator 1, oscillator 2, or the filter. That's that's your 3 main options just for the front panel. Although there's a modulation matrix here in the back. I'll go over that later, where you can do more. But let's say like we're running oscillator 1, or I'm sorry, LFO 1. You go to sine wave, you put it at a rate. You want it to modulate oscillator 1. Right now it's doing nothing, but I turn it up. Right? So that's pretty straightforward. And then if I turn on oscillator 2, okay, I'm just turning up and down here with the volume a little bit, you know, so it doesn't go out of control. But I turn on oscillator 2, let's say, I kind of make a sound like that. I can do just oscillator 1, for example, at that rate, and then let's say oscillator 2, I want to go really fast with the sine wave. So I can go to LFO 2 and just oscillator 2. Go back to 1 and let's say turn that down. Okay, like. Okay, let's just turn off oscillator 1 real quick. Okay. You hear that? So that's modulating oscillator 2. Again, I kind of assume that you understand synthesizers, so I'm not going to get too technical into like what the depth is and so forth. And then you switch back to oscillator 1, you turn this rate somewhere different, and basically LFO 1 now is modulating oscillator 1, LFO 2 is modulating oscillator 2 at a certain depth. And you can hear how, you know, they kind of interact, and then you find like a musical, you know, a musical sounding interaction. And you can also run them like multiple ones. Like this one can do 1 and 2, and this one can just do 1. And they just kind of like creates different shapes. Like let's say this is a square shape. So it's just like you understand how they interact with each other. And there's just basically 2 LFOs. And you can also modulate a filter. With the depth. Alright, so if you understand LFOs, you would understand how that's working right there. Now, there's also a separate LFO section that uses these 2 LFOs, but it just basically adds 2 more routing options here. And that's all it does. So this doesn't change the speed or shape of the LFO. This is just an extra 2 buttons to go along with these destinations. And this is for pulse width, oscillator 1 and 2. Okay, so basically you have to have the pulse waveform selected down here, like oscillator 1. Okay, you have pulse waveform selected. And then, alright, there's your pulse waveform. And then what you can do is go, let's say, a sine wave at this speed and pulse width. This modulates the pulse width, and this is your depth, just like right here. So all this does is creates PWM, and if you had 2 pulse oscillators running, like this, you could do both, or just one at a time. You know, and you can do the same kind of cross thing with like 2 different LFOs, controlling, you know, whatever is going on here, just like I showed you here. So really all these 2 buttons are, and this depth is just a copy of like what's going on here. They're just additional destinations for these LFO shapes, just for pulse width alone. All right, and then right here, this is your oscillator section, and basically it's pretty straightforward. You have 2 oscillators for this panel, and oscillator 1, oscillator 2, and this is you only have pulse. This third one right here is pulse width for oscillator 2, so you only have a pulse width control for oscillator 2 right here, and that's all this does. And this is a dedicated knob for the frequency of oscillator 1, and you can only go up by octaves. So you can see 0 plus 12 plus 24 plus 36, and this is for oscillator 2 frequency, and you can go by semitones. All right, these are the shapes. It basically lets you combine shapes between saw, pulse, and sine, or it's like a sine triangle, something like that. If you don't have any of them selected, then you're running basically like it's like a triangle wave. So you have a triangle wave, you select pulse, now you're running just the pulse. If you select just saw, you're running just the saw. And if you select both, you're like running kind of like it's just the 2 waveforms added together on 1 oscillator, saw and pulse. So it's not 2 oscillators, it's just 1 oscillator, but it's just got like a shape between a saw and a pulse. It's just a different shape. It's like you combine them, but they don't have different pitches. You just combine 2 shapes into 1 output. So it's like that's saw, and then you combine 2, and you get like that kind of tone. It's just like a combination. Okay, same here. This goes saw. Okay, and I'll show you how these are routed into the filter next. Pulse. You combine saw and pulse, but now you can change the pulse width for oscillator 2 here. And if you just do the pulse, you can hear it better. All right. So that's what's going on right there. And this is a sync button. So this just allows you to do oscillator sync. Okay. And oscillator sync is, I'm sure you know what that is. If not, you can look it up. But if you're just, it syncs oscillator 2 to oscillator 1. So as you raise the frequency of oscillator 2, you're going to get, and if you're only listening to oscillator 2, you're going to get that oscillator sync sound that I'm sure you're familiar with. It's hard sync. But right now I'm running like a triangle wave because none of these are selected, so it's a little weak. So let's do like a pulse. All right, so that's what that sync does. And it can get a little confusing when you're looking at it because you think, oh, this knob here must be related in some way to these two here, but it's not. This is only for pulse width for oscillator 2. That's all it does. This frequency F envelope, this just routes the filter envelope to the pitch of oscillator 2 based on the envelope amount actually in the filter. So right now I'm just running a pulse wave. I turned off the sync real quick so you can hear it. And then, well, you got to change. So it's actually controlled by the envelope amount. All right. So it's a little bit of an odd connection, but once you get a hang of it, you understand. So it just gives you a quick, straightforward way to, like, if you wanted to do the oscillator sync kind of sound, you can go. You know, so basically that's how that works. So that's the oscillators. Pretty straightforward, but also a little bit tricky to understand. And then you can go here in the filter section. Okay, filter sections, very straightforward. Frequency, resonance, and envelope amount, which is just the amount of your filter envelope. This is just like any other synthesizer that you've probably ever played. So right now, like here we go. There's one small tricky thing about it though, and I'll show you how to work around it later. But you see when you turn the frequency up all the way, it's still low. So actually you have to have, like, to get the fully open filter, it's a combination of a little bit of envelope amount with the full frequency. So if you just have the frequency all the way up and the envelope amount all the way down, this is just something peculiar about this synth. You're not having a fully open filter. Still, you have to bring this up. And it can get a little annoying because what if you just have a pluck, right? Like, right? So now it's like, oh, I have to have this sustain all the way up just to get a fully open filter running? Not necessarily, but that's one way to do it if you're just working with the front panel. You put the sustain all the way up on the filter envelope and, you know, you turn up the envelope amount a little bit. Now, there's a workaround for that in the modulation matrix in the back that I showed you. Okay, and I'm going to go through that soon here when I get to the back page. But basically, it's works just like that. So yeah, you need a little bit of this or something in the modulation to really open the filter all the way. This is not open all the way. And down here, the buttons, oscillator 1 is either on or off. So if everything is off, you're not going to have any sound. You got to have something running. But oscillator 2, there's two levels, two tiers to it. Okay, like this. Oh, well, you barely hear it because it's a triangle wave, but let me turn on the saw. So there's two tiers. So like off, quiet, and full. Now it's like both. Off, quiet. Let me detune this a little bit so you can hear. Off, quiet, full. This is where they're both on the same volume. Alright, or you can just run oscillator 2 and not do oscillator 1. Right? Now here's your noise. This just turns on a noise input into the filter. For this, you almost have to use a back panel to really make it work. And I'll show you how to do that just in the next segment. Alright? And then the bandpass BP is just a bandpass filter, so it just changes your filter to a bandpass instead of a low pass. If you don't know what that is, you can look it up, but basically it's like this: low pass, bandpass. As you can hear, you see, like, it doesn't really get to the bottom because you have this, so you don't really get a full range of motion with the frequency alone here. And it's just something peculiar about this synth, but it just modeled after how these synthesizers were actually modeled. 4-pull is just changes a 2-pull filter into a 4-pull filter. And 4-pull is 24 dB, 2-pull is 12 dB, so it's just a steeper filter. Like, you can look that up what that means. But as you can hear, it makes a different sound. Okay. And then track. This is filter tracking, which just basically takes filter tracking is like the frequency is lower at the lower notes and higher at the higher notes, so it gets brighter as you play up the keyboard. Whoops. So you can hear the frequency is low here, cut off, and high here. Now this tracking, again, it's almost better to do it on the back panel because this is either on 100% or off 100%. And it just modeled after how the original synthesizer was. And the back panel gives you options, like noise level, and to play with this frequency here without having to use the envelope amount to make it full, and to have partial keyboard tracking and things like that. And this was added by Synapse, you know, as something that's additional that was not on the original synthesizer. Then we go to the filters. The envelopes. There's a filter envelope and a loudness envelope, and this is just your standard ADSR, attack, decay, sustain, and release. I'm not going to go into what that is. You can look that up, or I'll do a video on it later, but basically, you know, it's just, you're familiar, I'm sure, with that. So this is for the filter. If you raise the envelope amount, this controls the envelope. Okay, so like, let's say to hear it better, you raise the resonance envelope. Right, that's your standard filter envelope. Amplitude envelope, same thing. Alright, so the only last thing I actually forgot on the front panel is this effects button right here in the common master. All this does is there's 3 effects here: reverb, delay, and chorus, and it just turns all of them on. Or off. So just a global button, but you can also turn them on and off individually back here. So that's it for just a basic overview of the front panel, although we haven't really gotten into this A, B, and the voice adjustments and everything yet. But I already showed you the voices before: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This just lets you edit them. I'll get into that later. And this is just a mute, so you can only have right now, let's say I have 8 voices. This shows you active and muted voices. So if you just do one like this, all right, that's only running one voice, or you can only run 4. All right, like that. So, and there's different usefulness for that I'll go into a little bit later. All right, so next what I kind of want to talk about a little bit is related to this section right here with the control, and we're going to go back to the portamento, as well as this Xmod and the Unison. So first I want to cover the Xmod because I didn't really go into that and how that works. And then after that, what I'm going to do is that'll kind of cover the whole front panel, like from a standard synthesizer perspective. And then I'm going to go into the portamento and the Unison, because these are a little bit tricky and related to the voices, as well as something here on the back regarding the voices called the organic knob. But before we get into the voices and portamento and this Unison mode, what I want to do is go over the Xmod real quick. So the Xmod is kind of like a trick knob. It's just, you just twist it and it's gonna do something interesting. But basically, it acts on oscillator 2. So if you just turn it while you only have oscillator 1 plugged in, you're not gonna hear anything. And if you have oscillator 2 plugged in, right now they're the same, oscillator 1 and oscillator 2. So like when it's cross modulating and it's like the same thing, you're not really going to hear difference. But let's say if we don't use any Xmod and we just move this up, start moving this pitch, just a very standard pitch bend. But let's say we turn up the Xmod. You hear how we start getting like a different kind of tonality. All right, so like let's say we blend it back in with the regular. So it's a little different with the Xmod all the way up versus if you're just changing the pitch regular, because it's modulating the pitch of this oscillator with this one. So you're not really it's FM. It's like a type of FM frequency modulation of the pitch of this. So you're always hearing it on oscillator 2. So if you want to hear the pure effect, you just do oscillator 2. I'm not going to go into full depth like what FM is, but you can look that up, or I'll explain it in another video later. But basically, this is like an FM knob. It's a little bit different sounding. It brings in it's almost like reminds me of the ring modulator on the MS-20 a little bit. It's just a little different than regular FM, I think. It's not so clear for like bell tones and things, but it adds something different. And one thing I like to do too with the Xmod is, like, if you just use it fully, you can get a full like FM kind of different sounds. Like it gives more like a plasticky or odd sound. It's not so quick to like run into bells territory. But it's kind of its own thing for this synthesizer. One thing I like to use it for actually is when doing like detunes. Like let's say I'm running a detune like this, detune saw. And I introduce Xmod a little bit. When you hear, it does make a difference. So it's like, it's almost like it just introduces a little bit more like movement. I don't know. I like to throw that in. That's a little like sound design thing I've done to give that detune a little bit more grit, and it can, you know, become more noticeable when you're going into like semitones and things. It just adds a little extra something. It's kind of a subtle effect sometimes. You can play around with it. Um, going into the next part is the portamento. And the portamento gets directly into this voices question on this synthesizer. And the reason I say that is because it's going to not act the same as other synthesizers. Um, 1 second here. Basically, the way that it works is like, I'm sure you know how portamento typically works, which is if you turn this up, there's a mono mode, a legato mode, and so forth. When you press like a different key up and down, it's going to like slide between the notes. Again, I'm not going to totally explain how portamento works. You should kind of know that as given my preface. But what's interesting here is the portamento is per voice. So if you look at this voice adjustment edit, okay, like let's say I change it here, and let's say I change it there. Okay, you can see how it's like voice 1 and voice 2 has different levels of portamento. All right, and so what's going to happen is if you're running all these voices, you're not going to have like you're playing oscillator 1, okay, and you turn up your portamento, okay. Here it's like sliding up, even though I'm like, I just played 4 notes in a row of the same note, and now they're sliding down 4 times. It's kind of because like it's not typical because it's like a separate one for each voice, like a separate synthesizer. It just gives unpredictable results. So really the only effective way to use portamento, like you can throw it in. I like to throw it in a little bit when I'm doing sound design on like just with a bunch of voices, like for like big chord sounds. And it adds a little bit of unpredictable kind of like sliding around right in the beginning. And it can be an effect. But if you just want regular portamento, you have to use it on one voice, or like you're using it the same way on all the voices using the Unison. So like in order to use one voice, what you want to do here is mute the other voices. See, and this is also a tip, like if you're running the synth like to make bass lines. Now I don't always do this for bass lines, but if you just want a straightforward bass line, you want a very stable tone. You don't want like all these little changes that come across every single separate synthesizer, so to speak, across each voice. And also, it gives you less monophonic mode, because you're not going to be, each voice is a separate key for multiple polyphony. So if you have only 2 voices, it'll alternate, but you can play a 2-note chord, but you can't play a 3-note chord. It's always gonna like only borrow 2 voices, so it'll only play 2 of the notes of whatever notes you're playing. So each note is a note of polyphony. Each voice is a note of polyphony. So if you want a monophonic sound, you just go here, and now if we play portamento, we get the standard portamento. And then if you click Unison, it's only using one voice, so you're not going to really do anything with the Unison because you're running one voice. Now, so that's how you kind of switch just to one voice, and you do some portamento, like regular, okay? But then the unison is like, let's say you want to run a 3. See, it like locks it. This section, it like locks it down for all these voices, like the portamento. Okay, so like if we ran 8 voices and put unison, now portamento works. See, that's not working properly. It's like going off and on. So when you lock the unison, you basically have to run the synth in mono mode for the portamento to work properly, and the only 2 ways to really run it in mono mode is to mute all the other voices or to use unison. Now, what unison does, and this is going to get into the actual voices themselves, as far as what unison does, is it plays all the voices you could see at once, however many you have active, so you can have up to 3 unison. All right, and each voice has like some fine-tuning element. So when you go here and you go to voice adjustment edit, like you see how now let's just turn the frequency like in such a way that it's kind of like right there at the edge of getting lowered. Let's say like right there. When you go to voice adjustment edit, you're going to get this. And basically each one, as you can see, click through it. See like these parameters on the oscillators and the envelopes and filters change. All right, a little bit on each voice. All right, so you can see here frequency for the oscillator 1, frequency for oscillator 2, pulse width. All right, scaling, which is like just kind of a keyboard tracking. Like, is it clean or is it like goes a little sharp? That's what scaling is. It's like on old synthesizers and analog synthesizers, like even with some of the ones I have, if you play like low notes and then higher notes, like the higher notes are like a little bit flat or a little bit sharp from the low notes, and that's the scale. And like versus a digital synth, something new, everything's always perfect, and it creates a little bit of that analog flavor. Now what I typically do, I'll tell you kind of my sound design stuff as I go along, but I leave the scales a little bit alone. Some of the stuff I like to leave alone. I don't, if you can imagine, you design a sound and you have to go through each one of these and, design like 8 different sounds. No, it's not quite like that. There's an easy way to do this. Not 8 different sounds, but like, those are, most of these are like fine tuning parameters. They're not like coarse, like frequency here. Let's go back to one voice 1. See the frequency here? Octaves. But let's go to voice edit, frequency. Very small, all the way. And it's it's like a very fine tune. So like the whole point of this is like subtlety. It's to create a subtle differentiation between the voices. That's why I said earlier, it's like you're having 8, when you have these multi voices, it's like you're having 8 synths, but they're all a little bit off. Like you tune them all to the same patch, but you can't really like tune them exactly the same if they're analog synthesizers. So it's like your cutoff is a little bit low or your frequency is a little bit high, but it's kind of the same, but not really. So that's the idea behind how the voices work. Except right here, there's a big semitone and a big pan knob, in which case these are very much full. And basically, the way that works is you can make like chords. So let's say like these are all like fine tune kind of things. Like even the frequency of the cutoff, for example, right? Can't even like hear that. See all the way down? It's fine tuned. It's barely, right? So every time you go to the voice edit, just remember these are fine tuned, even though you see the full knob. there's like fine-tuned just to make a subtle differentiation, and it's to create an organic analog character. It's not to completely have different patches on each voice. The way you have different patches per voice is, as I explained earlier, there's dual and split and single. So you can have up to 2 different patches running across the voices, but not 8. Okay, like dual is like 2 different patches, like 4 and 4, or 8 and 8 if you're running 16 voices. So if you run 16 voices, all it does is doubles the voices. So like if you're running through here, again, it just does this whole like taking turns, polyphonic, and every single voice is a little bit different. And you'll hear it, you know, if you start playing around with it. Like, they're a little bit different, but here's the trick. And we're going back to the Unison. The way that I said, you see, they're all very subtle, and like you would think, well, this is going to take me forever to edit 16 voices or to edit 8 voices. By the way, a reason to have 16 voices is if you're playing a patch with big chords, you're making a big chord patch, like 5 notes, and they're ringing out with release times. Imagine you're playing 5 notes ringing out with release times, and then you go to the next chord, you're going to get a bunch of cut off notes. So when you have 16, that really gives you a lot of polyphony. And also just it can do a lot of differentiation between each voice, like for more moving kind of organic sounds that change a lot more over time. The less voices you have, the less changes you have per note, and also the less polyphony you have. Now going back to the changes concept, what I was talking about with the changes and the subtle changes per voice edit, let's go back to 8. I like to usually work in 8 unless I'm doing a big polyphonic sound. It's a lot easier this way and more straightforward. So like, again, if we go to 3 voices, bang, bang, bang. See, now you can really hear this change. Listen. Like, you see how this one, the cutoff is a little lower, and listen to the pitch. Cutoff is a little higher, about the same. Now watch, if I go to edit, okay, you see, remember that the frequency and the envelope here play a role. So even all the way up, it's not all the way full, and boom, you see there, you see how this one was higher cutoff, so you can hear on the second voice the frequent envelope amount went higher. All right, and here was even a little higher, so the frequency went higher. All right, so you can see how it's like a subtle. Now if you have 8 of them, you're going to be running like, and if you listen carefully, the notes are not all in tune. Not completely. They're all like up and down. So when you look at the frequency here, like right now, I was just running oscillator 1. You look at oscillator 1 frequency, 1, 2. See the one a little low? This one's a little higher. This one's a little low. All right. Also the scale changes slightly, which affects the frequency even when this knob doesn't. So they're all a little bit different. So that's kind of like the Oberheim trick to get this Oberheim sound, as in the classic synthesizers, as they had this stack of voices. And that's how they got their polyphony, and it created all these effects. Now, going back again, do you have to do individual edits to every single voice, like make 16 different, 8 different patches in order just to get your organic sound, more or less? No, you don't. But there are some instances where you do kind of have to go in and make a quick adjustment like 8 times. It can get a little bit tedious, but that's just the nature of this synth. But you don't have to do that a lot of times, because here's the trick. You go to the back panel, all right? And on the back panel, there's this organic knob. And what the organic knob does is basically it changes how much difference there is across each voice in those fine-tuned parameters. So if we take it all the way down to 0, I still think there's some. Let me check. Okay. Barely. It's like a little bit. Yeah, there's still some. Okay, but that's not the only thing it changes. It changes like some pitch drift and other stuff like that. But, you know, it's just a general organic knob. But if you turn it all the way up, bang. You see, my understanding of how it works is I'm not actually sure if it changes the knobs here. It doesn't actually change the knobs from what I can see. What it does is it changes their values like internally. It just like makes them more sloppy of how they're read off. So like it spreads everything out wider. When you turn like the organic knob is turned up, all these things are actually spread out wider than they look. And if you turn the organic knob all the way down, everything is exactly precise. Let me explain it to you with sound. Okay, turn it all the way down. Let's listen again to 1, 2, and 3 voices on one note. Okay, now let's turn it all the way up. See, that's a bigger difference. And it also affects the pitch and everything. Do you hear how the frequency is going up and down like there's an LFO, but there isn't? And it basically creates instability. Like you hear old synthesizers like is playing like a sound, and it's like, you know, so like really retro stuff. And but that's very extreme. Normally you don't do that. You just take it up to like the default, I think, is about like right here. It's like very subtle. Okay, so the more you want that kind of wavering and differentiation across each voice, you turn up that organic, and it just creates a lot of sloppiness and drift in the pitch and the frequency, and a lot of this, like, it's like an old synthesizer where everything is like moving around and fluctuating with temperature or whatever, or just not stable. Okay, like let's say we do this and we play a chord. Let's say we turn this down. You hear that's stable. Now let's turn it all the way up. See how it's like moving around like an old synthesizer. But normally what you do is you work somewhere like right here, you know, or like a little bit more, like if you really want it. This is like a super heavy effect. Okay, so again, what this does is it spreads out all these like voice parameters. Even if it's not visibly so, it spreads them out like in the program, like makes it all moving around and more spread. So you don't have to, like, if you want to have more like variation across your notes or more variation across your frequency for the filter and things across these voices, you don't have to go in 8 times and change the variation to just spread it out more. You just turn up the organic and it does it for you, basically. And the more you turn it up, the more it spreads it out. All right. There's also like a, you right click on the synth, it goes to randomize voice adjustments. But this is like, makes it real crazy. If you want that, it's just like a way to get them all random, basically, across these fine tunings. All right. But that's that. And so, or you can go to initialize voice adjustments, which makes them, this is, it says in the manual, initialize voice adjustments means that it's like loses the analog character of the Oberheim. It just, everything is straight. So like, you know, but you see how it's still changing? Listen. Because I have that organic up. So even though those knobs are the same, organic gives it, it's like old. Gives it like an old school vibe. So even if it doesn't change on the screen, it basically does this whole like 8 voice adjustment for you real quick. If you bring it all the way down, now it's like a VST. It loses all that kind of like Oberheim analog organic stuff. Now, if you go to randomize voice adjustments, for example, I usually don't randomize. I just run it off the initial pattern, whatever I set up. But, or I kind of move it around a little bit. But you can go to randomize, and let's say we turn this organic way up, and we introduce a second oscillator subtly. Let's set a fifth. All right. Set a fifth, and let's say we do this. See how it's all moving around? Like, imagine that, and you just do like a pad and you turn some effects on. See, that's like a maximum, like that super old school synthesizer sound with all that organic stuff. Normally, let's say you want to have it a little bit less, just kind of a subtle effect. Like if I kind of want it like drifty but not like crazy, I like to turn it up a bit but not too much. It creates just a more regular like analog synth feel, but not like totally unstable. All right, so it just depends on how you want to work the organic knob with the voices. All right, and then that's how that works. Okay, so you saw kind of how to make those retro patches real quick with the organic knob and things like that. I usually leave it somewhere, you know, right there. It just depends on the patch. But like, again, let's say, what if we went to initialize voice adjustments and we went 0 organic. See, I don't get any more of that analog movement. It just sounds like a modern VST synth. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of how that all works. Now, one thing with those voices, I was going to tell you about two things: Unison and this chord thing with this semitones right here. So like one way you can make a chord sound is you go to the voices. Like let's say I do a 3-note chord. This is, all these are fine tunings except right here, okay, the pan and the semitones. The semitones, let's say 1 is a semitone 0, okay, 2 is going to be at semitone, you know, 3, like a minor chord, 3 is at semitone 7, so like a minor chord. Turn off the effects. All right, and actually, let me turn off this chordal function here because I'm actually running 2 oscillators with a detune, so it's like double chord, but like, see, you can hear that now. If you run Unison, you're gonna run all 3 of them at once. So let's say you did that, and let's say you wanted to, here's a sound design thing right here. You want to go like this and do like some filter envelopes. See, there's your house chord. Now imagine like, you know, you could even like bring in some 7th, not 7th, 5th tuning, and then add it in subtle. So you get an even fatter. Right? Now like do the envelopes a little. Do the effects. You see how that works? So that's that. Unison runs all 3 of them. Now another thing with Unison is you can make like a wide, go back to initialize patch. You can make a typical wide sound. And one way you can like spread the sounds out is by using that organic, because you remember it spreads out the tuning. So like, or you could go in individually here and like 1, 2, 3 and go in and spread the frequencies out for each of these voices like this, and go lower, higher. But an easy way to do it is to go like this and turn up the organic knob or down. Listen. There's all the way down. See, so that organic gives you like a spread unison because it spreads out the tunings of the voices. And then you can say how big of a unison you want. Let's say I just want 3 oscillators. Let's say I want a more stable spread now, instead of this kind of moving around spread. Now I'd have to go in manually. So let's say oscillator 1 is here. Then 2, voice 2. Let's say I want it like that, and voice 3 I want to. See what I'm saying? And then like now we can add in something like an oscillator 2 with some detune. Saw. Right? And then you'd have to go back in and do the same thing with oscillator 2, like this. Boom. And you can go up and down, you know. Now you have a big spread. And you would have to do that, you know, if you're going to run a bigger thing. Now you go in voice 4. You got to like really. So you have to do it either manually or, you know, I just like to, you know, do this organic. It kind of does a job a lot of times quick. But that's a little different sound, though. If you do it manually, you just have to take the time. So that's that. That's kind of how those voices work. That's the X mod. That's how that works. Voice adjustment, voice muting, unison. Again, if you're running unison, like a 3 voice unison, put your portamento on, it'll work fine. Alright, so there you see it now. A lot of times you just, boom, you just get a sound like that and you throw on some effects. Alright, see how you can start making different patches pretty easily. I mean, you know, easily like as far as the bass patches go, because to really make good patches, everything is in the details. You know, how do you tune this a little bit just the right way? You know, go in the voices and like just everything's detuned the right way and everything is set up and fine-tuned. That's how you make really carefully produced patches. But you can start getting the raw sounds easily, quickly, just doing that. And then go in and fine-tune all the parameters to get exactly that sound you want when you're playing across a keyboard. So we kind of went, you know, the common master, the unison, the voices, the X mod, and all that good stuff. Just a couple other brief things I wanted to jump into before I finish up this basic front panel right here is what mainly changes when you go through the voices is down here, oscillator, filters, and envelopes. As you can see up here, as you go through the voices, everything stays the same, with the exception of these parameters right here. Pan is always basically hard left and hard right, and it alternates. Now the reason for that being a default, really, and why you don't really need to worry about changing that unless you want, you really don't, unless you want to just have some kind of like offset panning for whatever reason for a certain segment of notes, and you know, go here and put them all in the center and then these all to the right or something. But that's for more tricky effects like with panning. But if you just want to keep basic panning, they alternate. But the thing is, when you're playing, you don't hear it. But that's where the spread comes in. So the spread is like the organic knob for the panning, kind of. in the way that like you don't really hear these things and you hear them more as the spread comes in. So like there's no spread, but as you increase it, okay, that left and right becomes audible in the voices. So like, and then the volume just changes slightly between each voice, which is just part of like an organic kind of sound idea. And then again, that's also a reason why, like, if you're running a bass line and you want something very solid, you want like one voice or like two very carefully controlled voices, because you don't really want to have, you know, sometimes if you want a very solid, consistent sound, like a Moog bass, you know, it's not going to have all these kind of like different volumes for every note and stuff like that. So that's what you want to watch out for. You know, so that's when you just turn it on to one voice. Now, the envelopes also change a little bit, as you can see across each thing. And again, these are all fine tuning, so it's not like this decay is way higher than this one. It's just a little bit. They're all like within a small range, just to make a slight difference, just like all these other ones. And the last couple things here is this scale. Again, it's just like the scale in the oscillators. When you turn on filter tracking, it's just a minute kind of differentiation of, you know, scaling up the keyboard, like, you know, kind of tweaks it so it's like perfect or imperfect, sharp or flat, whatever. You can just play with that a little bit, just like randomly throw it off, you know. It's like one of these small things that you can kind of just set at some random thing and it's probably going to sound good. And it gives it a more organic vibe, or you just go to the organic knob and that kind of throws all that off automatically for you. But this one is really important right here. I found its presence, because sometimes what happens is like I'm running a filter like this. Let's say I just run one voice. All right. Okay, here we go. Some of this is doing some funky stuff because I recorded some automation before by accident. But anyway, we're doing one voice, and one of the things that can happen is like you go to this voice one. Let's go to the presence. You hear how that's actually darker? Like we have the filter all the way open with the envelope amount and the frequency. And still, that's brighter and that's darker. So that presence knob is actually really important if you want to have a fully open, bright sound. And that's one of the things that, like, when I'm doing sound design, I realized with the synth is I would do like high pitch. I wanted like a really bright sound, and like I wasn't able to get it. I'm like, this is like a dull sounding synth or something, right? But like if you need that brightness, sometimes you got to go on every single voice you're doing and just turn that presence either all the way up or like differentiate it a little bit between each voice. But you want to have it up if you want a bright sound, because if it just happens to be low, it's like everything you play is not going to have that sizzle. And this little knob right here is what's going to rule that. So that's actually a really important knob. All right, welcome back, everybody. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go through the back panel, and we're going to discuss the back panel. And then after that, the last thing I'm going to go over is some things up here like the splits and dual mode and all that. So we discussed everything on the front panel, and our lead-ins to the back panel. Our first lead-ins were this LFO. We already went over that a little bit, and the organic parameter, we went over that, and we discussed how the frequency was not quite fully open without the envelope amount, and so forth, and how the noise just automatically came on full blast every time you click it on, and also the keyboard tracking, how it's at 100%. So these kind of things are things that are addressed on the back panel that give you a lot more flexibility with what you're doing. As well as when it comes to things like velocity, sensitivity, aftertouch, and different functions like that. So this is my back panel. I cleared these sources. I think by default, velocity and aftertouch is routed to a couple things, but I cleared it out. Oh, and also effects right here are on the back panel. So, you can always save your own defaults. This is mine. Yours looks basically like this, but you got like velocity and aftertouch. So this is the mod matrix. Now, again, I'm not going to go totally deep into like synthesizers and modular synthesizers and what it means. But that's something, I'm assuming you know a bit about in this video. But what I'm going to be going over is how this works in this synthesizer. So this mod matrix kind of turns this synthesizer into like a semi-modular synth in some ways. I mean, it's not, just like not really even semi-modular, just gives a lot more modulation capabilities than what you see on the front, and a lot more details that you can fill in. So basically the way it works is like this. Here you have a source, and you have 12, all right? And the source is various controls. Velocity, how hard you hit the keys. Key tracking, starting at 0, and key tracking starting at 4. C0 and C4 octaves, okay? Key tracking is basically like, meaning starting at C0 from the very bottom up, and starting at C4 from the middle of the keyboard up and down. It just, it depends on, it's going to be a different effect, but basically it's key tracking. You can play around and see what you like for your sound, but key tracking is like, and it's going to become more important to, as if you do like a split sound, for example, like you want from the bottom to the middle of the keyboard key tracking for, one thing, and then from the middle to the top on another thing, for example, for your leads and bass, something like that. But key tracking is like how it, it takes data from like the lowest note to the highest note and puts it as a value, like 1 to 128. So it can like be used to turn a knob, right? So you start at the very bottom at 1, and as you go up the keys, it's like turning a knob up, and you can use that to change something like the cutoff of the frequency. Mod wheel is just your modulation wheel. Pitch bend is just your pitch bend amount. Aftertouch, this is one aftertouch parameter. If you have a singular aftertouch, like a basic aftertouch keyboard, it's kind of like a modulation parameter that, once you hit the keys, how hard is velocity, and then how hard you keep pressing them up and down, like, on these like nicer aftertouch keyboards, will allow you to modulate something. And poly aftertouch is on the even nicer aftertouch keyboards that have that aftertouch parameter for every single note separately, like velocity. So you can really get in there and really create some interesting sounds. This is for a foot controller. A foot controller is like, if you have like a foot pedal, like on a piano, electric piano or keyboard. Expression is just a MIDI CC control that sends expression. If you have a MIDI controller that sends that out, then you route it there and it's going to affect it. Timbre is another CC MIDI control. If you have a MIDI keyboard that routes that out, you can control it there. On a typical, just like a regular MIDI keyboard, you probably are not going to have a timbre expression. You're probably not going to have aftertouch or poly aftertouch. I don't, frankly, on my keyboard. And it's just a standard Korg MIDI controller. Then constant, this is very important. Constant is like a 127, like a full value. 127 is like the typical MIDI range, like 100%, basically. And this just like sticks something at 100%, and it's a constant. And when you turn the amount, then you're moving it from 0 to 100%, and you'll see why that's useful. Random is just random. It's like just random stuff. If you want to make something more organic or kind of weird, or like move around, it's kind of like a organic parameter for one thing. You know, LFO1, LFO2. This just puts those two LFOs we have and their routings, like oscillator 1, 2 filter, and the pulse width for oscillator 1 and 2, and it enables you to route them to basically almost anything. LFO1 times mod wheel, LFO2 times mod wheel. That basically means like if you want your mod wheel to control the LFO1 or 2 amount, right? And then like it's like your LFO when the mod wheel's all the way up, then your LFO's all the way up. And then those two combined things you can use to control something. So it's like two controls in one. It's like an LFO based on your mod wheel amount, on or off, and then you route that to control something. So if your mod wheel's all the way down, you're not going to hear it. And if you turn the mod wheel all the way up, those LFOs become activated and they become routed to your destination. So it's kind of a more combined, more combined element. This is the same thing, LFO1 or 2 times aftertouch, and it works the same way like I explained on the mod wheel. Then you have your filter envelope and amp envelope. These are sources. Okay. You have destinations. Go through these real quick. There's a lot of them. This is what the sources can control. For example, you route your velocity to your cutoff amount. All right. Then it controls how hard when you hit the key the cutoff goes. So like this is going to show you how the amount function works. So I put velocity times cutoff. Okay, right now it's at 0, so you're not going to hear anything. But if you turn it up, you see the 0 is like where it starts. So it was already high, so you're not really going to hear it. Okay, but if you go turn it down, see, there you go. All right, you see how that works? I'm just hitting the key at different amounts. That's the velocity, and you can also do it backwards. So like if you start high, it's like if you want to do it backwards. This is, not typical for this control, but it's like the lighter you press it, it's high, and then you press it harder and it's lower. So you can do it any parameter backwards or forwards, and the 0 is in the middle. And you can see here +3 0 minus 22. If you double click that, you return it to 0. So it's a quick way. Then the other parameters are resonance. So this again, assuming you know synthesis, I'm just going to go through these. Resonance, envelope amount. So like if you want to control the envelope amount, this is actually useful because like rather than just putting the cutoff high or low, you're going to like make a pluck, for example. And like the pluck itself goes higher or lower, not the full thing. So like versus if you're to do the full cutoff, it'd be like, you see the difference? So it's just like routing that velocity to whatever control is talking about. And like if that value is higher, then this is higher. So, and then you can imagine how these would sound different. That's basically like a crash course 101 on, synthesizer routings. Then volume, your standard velocity volume. So like quiet, loud, like as a piano. And then fine tuning. So you can actually like have your oscillators tune a little sharp or flat. If you hit the keys harder, it can create an interesting effect. Oscillator, that's based on velocity. So I don't want to just talk about velocity. These are routings for any parameter. So you can just have any of these, like a mod wheel, for example. Go to OSC1 fine, and then it's going to be like this. I'm moving the mod wheel up and down, and it's like raising that pitch. but it's fine-tuned. Or you can do ask one of, you know, volume, or ask one then yeah, there's semitones, you know, so like, so those, and you can route any of these functions like velocity to ask one semitones. That's just hitting the same key at different levels. So it's like, you know, you can either go crazy or just do something mild and, you know, subtle to create like a more regular sound, but with some interesting effects, right? Or just open up the flexibility of these parameters. Like, what are you going to route the LFO? You know, let's say you want to route LFO1 in order to go to the noise volume. Okay, this is where we talked about that noise volume. You still, in order to have the noise volume, you have to have the noise active. So remember that. Hear that? That's, now we're going LFO1 to noise volume. And you know why that's doing that? You remember how I told you before, like the filter is going down even when this is all the way open? Because the envelope amount like is combined with the frequency in order to open the filter all the way. And I'm going to discuss that next. Okay? But like, here's where I'm going to jump into that, and then I'm going to go through the rest of the parameters real quick. So we're going to end at noise volume for a second on the destination, and I'm going to talk real quick about some the constant. Okay, the constant, that's that 100% value. Okay, this is where, like, normally if you're running nothing, like you turn it off, any modulation to noise volume, that noise is 100%. So like you want to run it, that's a lot of noise. You take that constant amount, which is like 100%, and you put it on the noise volume. Now check it out. See? Now you 100% or like boom, a little bit. See, now you're at 14. That's much more acceptable than running it at 100, you know? Another thing you can do with that constant, check this out. Turn that cutoff up, you know, however much you want. So like, even if this is all the way down, we're gonna get a full cutoff now. Like, let's say this is off. You hear how that cutoff is not full, even though it's all the way up, and we're dependent on this mod wheel, which, I mean, on this envelope amount, which may be some shape, and you can't get a full cutoff, you know, no matter what you do, unless you use this constant. So let's raise it up until I get a full cutoff. And if you touch that point, right where it's just full, see, now you get a much more normal, like typical synth where you don't even need this, but you're not going down as low. Okay, so it's like you're offsetting that cutoff, but you can now open it all the way without worrying about that envelope amount. Okay, so those are two really important functions. Going back, you can use any source to control anything. So like organic, that changes your organic knob. We talked about that. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the keyboard tracking. You remember we went over the keyboard tracking parameter, and how like when you turn it on, it goes to 100%, or well, you have to get rid of it out of here. All right, so now your filter cutoff tracks your keyboard, so lower versus higher. See, it's closed, open. What if you want a more subtle effect? Okay, then you can turn on your keyboard tracking, and you go to constant keyboard tracking, filter keyboard track. Now it says 0 because you have it set to 0. it resets itself based on this control, overrides this 100%. And then you can turn it to a lower volume. So now, not volume, but amount. See, now you have more subtle keyboard tracking of the frequency. See what I'm saying? So that's how you can use a constant to control the keyboard tracking. You can also do it with velocity, mod wheel, any of this crazy stuff, but this is kind of a typical one as a constant. Then filter attack, filter decay, filter sustain, filter release. A good one here I like is like a modulation wheel or velocity. So like you can take a fast sound and use a modulation wheel up, and you're gonna turn up the filter attack, for example. So like use a mod wheel, filter attack. So like normally you have to have, anytime you're using these attack, decay, sustain, release, you have to have your envelope doing something, because if it's not going to have any effect. This is the filter envelope, so it has to be activated. So turn up the amount. See, we got this pluck, but I turned the mod wheel to filter attack. So now as I turn up the mod wheel, you see what I'm saying? It actually moves that filter attack up. See, I was real slow. And if I want to, like, I can even double things up. So I can go to filter attack again, and now it's gonna be, well, actually it doesn't double the length, it actually makes it faster. But the point is, you can't, I have doubled parameters before. You just got to know what, like, how it's doubling what, you know. So this is actually stacks the effect twice, so it's actually like making it twice as fast, in which case it's not really useful here, but you know, you get the point of that. And then again, double click to turn it to 0. Filter attack, decay, sustain, release. So you can like turn your mod wheel, for example, sustain, filter sustain. Let's say you have open sustain. You turn your filter sustain down with your mod wheel, and you turn the open sound into a pluck. All right. Then we got that. Then same thing with amp envelope. You know, you can do a mod wheel to amp envelope up, turn it into like a pad. Or if you have a pad already, you can move it down and you turn a pad into a pluck. You know, it just depends on how far out your parameters are. That's another one where, like, let's say this is all the way out. That's still not a pluck. So, like, you know, if I double it up, well, I don't need to double it up. I just go to 100%. There we go. All right, there's that. LFO depth. That's a good one too. Mod wheel to LFO depth. I like that. Or you can get creative. Put your aftertouch or velocity or something there. So then first you have to remember, you put that to LFO depth, but you don't have your LFO doing anything. Oh, why is it not working? Well, it's not working because you don't have the LFO depth on routed to anything. So let's route it to oscillator 1. Pitch, frequency, oscillator 1, LFO 1. So it's not doing anything, but you route it to the mod wheel. Right? And you can get creative and do the rates and amounts. Like set it to vibrato when it's high. Like something nice. Fine tune it. There we go. Now play with it. Alright. There we go. LFO 2 depth, same thing, LFO 1 rate. So like I can set two things up, for example, to one source to two different parameters. So let's say I want to get the LFO 1 not only going deeper but also faster when I turn up the mod wheel. So it's like, And you can really hear it more if you start with it slower. All right. There's that. Okay, LFO1 rate, LFO2 rate. Part mix. Part mix is this thing right here. Just remember that. You can mix between part A and part B, and we're going to go into parts later. This is the effects. Okay, so basically DL stands for delay, RV stands for reverb, CH stands for chorus. And we're going to go into those effects right now, and then I'm going to kind of hop back into here and show you some cool effects things. So let's just disable all this for now. All right, so now you know how the mod matrix works, and you just have 12 positions, and you can just route whatever to whatever you saw. Anything to anything. If you want to get funky and like put an envelope to the LFO rate and LFO amount. So like every time you press a key, it's like, you know, does something weird. You can do that. You can get very creative. Now the effects, again, it's like to have something active here, you have to make sure it's active like where it's supposed to be. So in this case, let's go to, we're going to go to, there's a basic sawtooth effects. You got to turn them on. Boom. I turn it on. The default is cool, but it's pretty hardcore. It's pretty heavy. All right, so let's just, one way you can turn the effects on or off is globally here. And the reason they put it globally here too is it becomes like a traditional synth for like you want the raw synthesizer, you know, versus like the synthesizer with effects. It's just a global easy button. Another thing you can do that I want to mention is you can actually lock parameters on the screen. So you right click and you go to lock parameter or MIDI learn. MIDI learn is like, you know, if you have a MIDI controller, MIDI forget is to clear the MIDI controller. So you have a button, you press MIDI learn, you press your button on your MIDI controller, you turn that button on. Same with any knob. MIDI forget, you forget that parameter. That's kind of more to do with MIDI routing. So that, you know, you can look that up. But lock parameter, what lock parameter does, you see it's got a lock on it. So that means like if I'm browsing through different presets actually, or just playing around or whatever, it's going to keep that on or off. So like if I go to the default, for example, stuff that they have here, you know, leads or whatever, right? They're the default leads. There's the effects is on. But let's say I turn it off. I just get the raw sound. Now I can lock the parameter. Now as I go through different presets, they stay off. You understand what I'm saying? So that's that. And then if you unlock it, then like when you switch, now that preset has that effect on. All right, so that's kind of where we're at. Let me go back to the initialize patch. So we're going back to the effects on. Each effect is activated individually and deactivated individually right here. Active, active, active. So if we actually turn all of them off, even though this effects on is turned on, you're not going to get any effect because they're all individually deactivated. And then you can reactivate them one at a time. Reverb, delay, chorus. So if you just want one or multiple, you can have it however you want. All right. Now we'll just quickly go over the effects parameters because these are just kind of pretty straightforward. If you know effects, which, you know, again, I'm assuming you know a bit about synthesis and effects in this tutorial, or you can look it up, or I'll make more videos on it later. But reverb, okay, wet dry is always the strength of the signal. So the strength of the whatever effect or whatever's going on. So 0 is dry, means like pure sound, like original. Wet is pure the effect. All right. So you want like a little bit of reverb, you just turn it up a little bit. All right. And then the time is how long the reverb is. So if it's short, it's actually kind of a cool effect. And then like, let's say you do that, you could actually like turn on an external reverb that's long in your workstation separately from this, and then like run this short verb on top of like that long verb, and you get like almost another patch. All right, that's just another little tip. But or you can turn it super long if you just want like a drone. Right? So, boom. Let's turn it back down. Okay. Color is like brightness of the reverb. So like when you turn it all the way here, you get the brightest reverb, and when you turn it to 10, it actually goes dull. So it's like kills off the highs. So if you want a bright, like full sound, you know, like this, or you want something a little more subdued. Width is just stereo. Usually I just leave this all the way up because the big stereo effect is pretty modern, but if you want a retro reverb, you can make it less stereo or whatever. It doesn't have to be retro, just you want a mono reverb for whatever reason. It almost sounds weird because we're not used to hearing mono reverb. But you can spread it out a little bit less, more. 10 is usually like what you're normally going to hear on a reverb on a record. So it's usually locked there, but you can play around with that. Now, one of the special things in this synthesizer is regen and shimmer. So the shimmer comes first, really. The regen is like the secondary option. So what shimmer does is it like creates a second like octave or several octaves up. Like check this out. You see it's like an octave up. So it like creates a reverb an octave up, and that can be useful like with different sounds like this. Let's say you do like a more like bellish, and then you put your shimmer. All right. Regen is like what that does is it keeps stacking octaves on the last octave on the last octave, like it does regeneration based on what it was before, so you get a more shimmer. Like this is basic shimmer, this is like brighter shimmer, basically, is what you're looking at. So like if you kind of put it on a little bit, you know, you can get some nice effects. Right? That's a little more straightforward without the regen. So kind of like, as the name suggests, it creates a shimmering effect on the reverb. Then there's chorale. This is another specialty here that we have. Chorale is basically the same parameters, except this color is a formant, and formant is like a vowel. Okay. Now this can be used in many ways, like just as a part of a reverb effect, like combined with some shimmer. Right? Let's say you turn it up all the way, you're gonna have pure formant sounds. You know, be careful, it gets a little loud. Right? And then if you turn down the time, you're almost getting like a little formant patch. Now check this out. Okay, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna show you something. Let's go to the mod matrix, and you see how this is a different vowel. Okay, let's turn that to key tracking 0, and do that to the color, RV color, because remember anything in the mod matrix can be set to this. So now what's going to happen is you're going to have different keys will play different vowels. And the more you do it, the more extreme the effect. Okay, so now versus just like flat. See how right there, every one of them is E? So that's that. You can also do that to like shimmer or whatever. You can like, let's say for example, you do this to the R-beat color and then you do the mod wheel to the shimmer. You know, this is kind of like you set this regen and it's not going to do anything until the shimmer is up. And so like this sets a parameter for the shimmer. So let's say we do this and we do the mod wheel to shimmer. See, there we go. And you know, the trick to getting good sounds and not like basic sounds, like this is a good start, but a good sound is like spending a lot of time to really fine tune like all of this stuff till it like sounds like, yeah, now this is really on point across the keyboard. Okay, so that's the reverb. All right, let's turn all that mod wheel and stuff off. And then delay right here, very basic kind of delay. Okay, dry wet, you know what that is. Time, this is synced up delay, you know, 8th notes, dotted 16th notes. You know, you should kind of know that. Feedback is just how long the delay keeps going. So like short is just like once or twice, long keeps going for a long time. Width is again the stereo thing, like the reverb. It's almost weird when you put it to mono. So usually I leave it up, which is like what you normally hear, but it can be an extra effect to make it mono. Low cut is actually pretty useful because like if you're doing like a bass, let me turn this up again. You don't want that bass echoing. You only want the top end, so you cut it, do low cut. See that? Versus this. And, oh, what can you do? You can go here. Delay low cut by mod wheel. Boom, for example, right? See, or you can do it by keyboard tracking or something if you want it like, let's say you want to only low cut on the bass notes, but not on the high notes. So we go to keyboard tracking, starting at, you know, C4 or something. I just play around with whatever sounds better. And then go to low cut, where are we at here? Delay, low cut. So like the low cut, I want it higher. No, I want it lower when, no, I want it, the low cut. Okay. The low cut should not be higher when the higher notes are higher. It should be lower when the notes go up. And it should be higher when they go down. So you start with it high, and then turning a negative amount makes it go down as the notes go up. So like, see, there's more now on the high notes and less on the low notes. There we go. So you can see how all those things work together. High cut is kind of like this color for the reverb. It just, when it's on normal, it just cuts the highs, which is useful too, because you don't always want it like super prominent, you know, more subtle like that, and add some low cut too. You can create a really bandpass, like a really narrow sounding effect like that. Right, so you can do all kinds of interesting stuff with that. Chorus is really nice because it makes a lot of sounds more modern. Frankly, a lot of modern sounds, if you listen to like the Blade Runner soundtrack, like the old one versus the new one, like the new one, every sound is like chorused and the old one, every sound is like raw. So you kind of get this effect where like choruses like make a more modern sound, but it just kind of spreads it out and stuff. I like to use a little bit of it on a lot of sounds because you just get a more like modern polished sound. So dry wet. I'm not going to explain what chorus does, but there's that rate just makes the effect like a little faster and crazier, or like this is like a slow phasing, and when you increase it you get a more detuned thing. So like this. And this is actually another interesting one that I did on some of my presets that I have on my channel, is I went like this and I did a mod wheel to this chorus rate. So let's say like imagine this. Okay, we do a little bit of delay, some reverb. Whoops, let's turn them on. Right, and then what we're gonna do is do mod wheel to chorus rate. Now imagine we did that and we did like a little bit of this LFO 1 to pitch together with the mod wheel. Mod wheel goes to LFO 1 depth. Where's that? Like that. Boom. That's a little crazy. You see how I'm getting these polyphonic things? What if I want that like a lead? I don't want polyphonic, right? You're gonna have to, unless you want a big unison sound with all voices at once, you're gonna have to narrow it down to one voice. Now you have that monophonic. You'll lose some of that motion across voices, but you have to do it if you want to get this monophonic effect. And then you turn on some portamento. Right, there you go. So there's some sound design 101. We got that. Okay, and that's the rate. That's the dry wet. And then you get again low cut, high cut. You can make these band pass kind of effects on the chorus. Just disable this for a minute. Disable these effects. Boom. So like high cut. It's like only affecting the top portion of the sound, which can be useful like on a bass. Like there's a big just as you can also do mod wheel, let's say, to chorus high cut, right? So like you can see how we can like use one parameter for different multiple things to create like an interesting sound for your modulation wheel, which is what a lot of what I've done on my sounds. Then low cut, actually, no, I kind of thought it backwards on the bass, but you heard that effect. A bass is more like low cut here. They're a little bit different position. I got it mixed up, but low cut is right here. So like, let's say you just want a dry bass, but you just want that chorus on the top end only. So like, versus like this. So you get a dry bottom and a chorus top. You can do a band pass again. You can hear how I already have like an interesting sound, and all I have running is like without the effects is like literally a square wave. All right, there's that. All right, and so you can see there's lots of creative ways to kind of mess around with this. And remember that anything that's marked here is going to bypass automatically or like contribute to, you have to test it out, whatever's right here. But like LFO depth, like you have here, for example, oscillator 1, LFO depth. But as soon as I put the mod wheel to it, okay, that one doesn't cancel out, but other ones like the key tracking and noise volume and things do cancel out. So you have to check each one. See, but this one adds onto it. Or you can actually take it out with the mod wheel by negative values. All right, so that's that on the back panel. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about is this LFO steps tool right here. You can see LFO steps. Now, this on its own doesn't do anything. You have to activate it on the front panel. Like, it doesn't do anything by itself unless you activate it. And the way that you activate it, as you can see here, it says LFO1 and LFO2. So this takes up a slot of a shape of LFO1 or LFO2. So if you're going to use this for one of those LFOs, you're not going to be able to use one of these shapes. That's the options here. One is sine, square, sample and hold, or the steps. Now, it also applies again to these routings here by default, or pulse width, or you can, when you do the matrix, you route LFO1 to whatever destination. If we're using this shape, it's going to work, you know, just routing that shape. It just basically, like, this is drawing your own shape, but it works the same way as any other shape. Now, you do lose the sine, square, for example. So, like, what if you want a synced sine tooth, synced sine wave, not sine tooth? Because you see here, for example, like, the sine and the square, it goes by hertz, so it's not synced to your tempo project. So what would you do if you still want a sine wave, but you want to tempo sync that sine wave, or you want to tempo sync that square wave? Well, you go to your steps. You see how now when you switch to steps, it's automatically on tempo sync. All right. And like a half, 1, an eighth. So let's say you want a tempo sync sine wave. Okay, right now you see how it's running because I have it selected on LFO1 and the shape is running. Now if you click LFO2 right here, you can see that it's not running on LFO2 because I don't have it selected. So in order to have it running, I have to select it. Now it's going to be running here. All right, so let's go back to LFO1. All right, what I'm going to do is show you, you know, make a synced like sine wave or something similar, like a triangle, you know, wave or something. So the way to do this is basically you have a different, like, the rate is always the same. Like the cycle from the start to the end of your waveform is based on your rate here. So right now it's at a half note. So like, okay, there's a click 1 1, so that's at a bar. All right, so it's gonna go for a full bar. All right, and it just tempo sync based on, you know, your tempo wherever you started it and so forth. But this is always like whatever length it is here. So if you go back to a half note, it's gonna go through every half note. If you go here to a quarter note, it's gonna go through every quarter note. All right. Now the kind of tricky thing about it is, like, okay, here. So let's say we're going to do a synced like sine kind of a wave. It's easier, frankly, to do a triangle wave, and I'll show you why. You know, but you can still do a sine or something very close. Basically, you have here the steps. All right. So like, let's say I'm going to, here's your two tools. This is like if you ever use Paint or Photoshop or something. You have like a pencil tool and a line tool. And the pencil tool, like, lets you go in like with a pencil and just draw whatever. And a line tool lets you use it like a line to make your drawing. Okay. Now, for example, there we go. Oh, why is it not doing anything? Because it's not by itself. It has to route with the LFO1. So we got to put it on depth onto something, oscillator 1. Now it's got some stepping to it, and the multiple workarounds to this is you can do more steps, but here there's a soften parameter. And what the soften does is it's not like 100% perfect, but it's like, it's not going to give you, if you don't have enough steps, it's not going to just give you a full circular waveform, but it softens up the that gap between those steppy kind of sounds. Like if you want to hear the steps more, let's slow it down. Okay, that's kind of like a sine, but it's got those steps. So you turn soften and it goes up by percentage. But you see where you got big jumps, it's still like audible. So it's not a total soften. You can hear it more without the soften, the steps. Now, let's say I want it more softer. Well, there's a resolution. Resolution is how many you have. So here's 16. If I go to 4 steps, you see I'm only getting 4. But notice that it like zooms into a portion only of the shape, but you'll see what I'm saying in a second. But it always maintains the same rate based on your LFO as far as the cycle through the whole thing. Let's go to soften. And again, the soften is not going to create this perfect line. It's just going to kind of make a little bit of a glide between the steps. Now, if you really want something like more smooth, you go to 32 steps. And what happens is when you increase the steps, it's like you zoom out of the shape. You can go up to 128. Okay, you zoom out of the shape, but by zooming out, like the whole pattern is still the same rate through the LFO. Like right now, it's on half step. But as you zoom out, like the individual portions get faster. So if you want to keep the same shape, you're going to have to redraw it. So at 128 steps, I can go back and do my like triangle wave. All right, and if I put some soften, then you know for sure you're running like a much more triangle wave without any steps. And then like if I wanted a more sine-ish, I can go to the pencil tool or use multiple line tools, like you have to really draw it in. I mean, it's how it is. Or you go to the pencil tool. The pencil tool just lets you freeform draw. So if you got good hands, go at it. Something like that. But it's pretty difficult to get like a sine wave or something. So I just shoot for like a triangle or something. But that's how it works. And one thing that a lot of steps allows you to do is it allows you to create more intricate patterns, because if you only have 4 steps, all right, you just have like a basic pattern. You can only do so much. But you can also create like a arpeggio. But if you have like a lot of steps, you can do more different shapes, like this. Right, so another thing you could do also is, you find like, for example, something like this. Okay, and then when you change the depth, if you really used like a tuner and you wanted to do all that, you could create like arpeggio kind of. Okay, and like let's say we want an arpeggio now. Here's where the next step comes in. It's easier to do something like that, obviously, with specifically for lines, for example, right? Like whatever I just did. All right. But let's say like we want a real arpeggio, and a real arpeggio kind of pattern where the like the filter envelope, it like re-triggers every time like you're playing a separate note. So what you do is you click filter envelope retrig, and this is gonna work a lot more like better if you're using a slower, like less steps, than if you're using like 128 steps. Unless you're using it at like a really low tempo, because every time a step comes, it's gonna re-trigger the envelope completely. So like when you use this, so like let's do your filter envelope like normally, like this. All right, you see? That right now it's just going once. Okay, but if you go to retrigger, every time you go a step, it's gonna retrigger. So you put on some delay or something. It's like some kind of techno or something. Right, so there's that. The last function here really is called the one shot. And the one shot button, what it does is it's going to give you an extra envelope. And since you have two LFOs, you can borrow one of the LFOs to create an envelope. Okay, so you can have up to 2 extra envelopes instead of LFOs if you want, or 1 extra envelope and 1 LFO. And keep in mind, this is a regular shape just like this. So if you go in the routing and you route like LFO1 to something, you know, some kind of thing, here it's gonna work just the same as if you're using a regular shape. Okay, and I'll just do that in a second here, but let's go to one shot. This works better probably with more steps, unless you want to have a specific effect. So because then you can really draw on a good envelope. So like, okay. So now I have 3 envelopes. I have my filter envelope, my amp envelope, and a pitch envelope. Because one shot, it just runs it through once like an envelope and then it stops. All right. So that's that. And again, you can, right now this is routed to oscillator 1. You could route it to anything. So like while you're using the steps. So we're going to go LFO1. And let's say I want to like do something weird. And I'm thinking about, okay, I'm going to run the effects. And I'm going to do LFO1. It's going to go to, you know, like the chorus, dry, wet. Well, what happened? Can't really hear it. Oh, that's because I have no amount. That's why. You see, you got to put an amount. I was like, why is this not working? So you can actually hear it pluck in the beginning there. See, like. And if you slow this down, you can hear it more. Right? You can hear that. So that can be used for some interesting stuff. You know, like. Like if you're making techno or something interesting, you know. So that's that. So that's the LFO steps tool. Okay. So the last few things I wanted to bring up is regarding some of these functions right here, like the remaining functions under the global, and also the single and dual and split in this A and B. So basically goes like this. Under the global here, you have, we already went over the organic knob. Here you have VCA saturation, and basically that is just like a distortion effect, not like a saturation effect, you know, mild distortion. It just one effect, like it's either on or off. So, you know, and it could depend on various factors here, like how loud a patch is or something, but it's just something to play around with and see if you like it. So, for example, if, you know, you make like a bass patch or something like this, you can try to turn this on. And it's, it has a slight effect. And it's more noticeable when you do more complex patches. As you can hear, though, it's pretty subtle. It's just something to play around with. Like if you really have a, you know, certain patches, you'll turn it on, you'll hear like, oh, there's quite a difference there. But it's always just like a subtle saturation. It's not like a huge thing like a reverb or something. Then there's a limiter. Limiter is like sets a maximum level for your sounds. And one of the good reasons that I personally use a limiter is when doing like big polyphonic patches, because when you set the limiter on, you have like a maximum level. So if you kind of set it up at a near maximum level or some kind of level, like you think with the volume here, there's kind of a ceiling. So like once you set the limiter on, like somewhere around there or something, there's a ceiling. And then if you go lower, then there's more of a headroom. Like, you know, again, this is like assuming you know a little bit about audio and so forth, but there's a certain point you hit the limiter and there's some headroom. So like you can kind of set your patch somewhere that you have some headroom. And then this helps when doing polyphonic, because if you're like gonna be worried about volume fluctuations when hitting more or less keys, like let's say, you know, right now, can't even hear it that much. It really comes into effect though when you're doing certain patches. Like there's a big volume difference between hitting one note and hitting 5 notes, you know, or something like that. And sometimes you want to have a consistent volume between like the 1 and the 5 notes. You turn on the limiter and you kind of push it up to its headroom. It really, once you set it to the right level, it evens out that volume differentiation. Here, that's a lot. That's almost the same. So it flattens it out. So you can kind of play around with the polyphonic. And you don't have these big jumps in volume. It can also just be used as an effect for if you have different patches, you know. So you can play around with that, and they can be used together. The saturation comes before the limiter, so the limiter is always at the end. Pitch bend range, up and down. This just sets your pitch bend range up and down. Very simple. Right now it's 12. You can do different ranges up and down. So let's do like 3 and 1. Okay. So it goes up 3, down 1. Very simple. Transpose, this is useful because it just allows you to, you know, like if you're doing a bass patch and you want to turn it on right away and have it playing bass instead of having to like, you know, go down on your MIDI keyboard and the lower octaves, or if you have a smaller keyboard, you have to press the button to get in the lower octaves. You know, like when I did my preset bank, you know, I just set the transpose lower on the bass, so right away when you hit the middle buttons, you're playing bass. You're not playing like a treble sound, you know. So like I'm hitting like middle buttons and I want to make it a bass sound, I'm just going to go and turn it down, you know, usually by octaves. But it can also be useful like if you're doing some kind of FM with Xmod or different kind of things with pitch bend and stuff in the patches. Sometimes you use a combination of the tuning and the transpose to get it back into the correct pitch for whatever sound you're doing. All right. Next, we're going to go into the split thing. So this is going into the voices and the single and dual situation. So single, dual, and split. And then we went over the 8 and 16 voices. You remember how the 8/16 voices works, borrowing and so forth. Now you remember I told you each 8 voice or each 16 voice is like a small variation. It's like a fine tuning of the same patch over and over again to create like polyphonic spread and so forth. Well, when you go to dual or split, it's no longer fine tuning. It's a very big, like you have whole different patches in most parameters, and that's where you got to be a little bit careful. But typically when I'm doing dual or split, you want to usually have, it depends on what kind of sound you're doing, but you know, unless you're doing like a bass sound or something where you want to really limit the polyphony. Like if you're doing a bass sound with dual, for example, you have 2 voices because one dual, you're running like 2 separate synthesizers, so you're always going to have a minimum of 2 voices, just hitting one key. All right. And split, you can actually have one voice. And what split does is basically dual is you're running like 2 different synthesizers split across voices, like half and half, together on top of each other. Okay. And what split does is it takes like one synthesizer and puts it on the top keys, and one synthesizer puts it on the bottom keys. And that's set by this split parameter right here, which determines where it's at. So right now it's C4. So I put it on split, and right now it activated this B. And as you can see here, this B synthesizer, this is like a whole separate patch. All these things changed. And there's A. And you can actually control the volumes between them. Like in the middle is kind of an even volume. But like if you want your lower one, like if you're doing a split, louder than your top one, like this is like a volume mixer. And if you have dual, then you know you want like one part of your patch being louder than the second part. You know, that's also a volume mixer. And you can also control this with mod wheel, envelope, and every other parameter in the modulation matrix. So right now we're at split. And I'm going to finish up that thing on the back with the split with the C4. So right now, as you can see, there's like 2 different settings. So as I go up the keyboard, I'm going to go up to C4. See how it changed on C4. Now if I bring this down to like, let's say C3. Now I go here. Oh, that was C#3. Okay, so you can see how you can change that split point. You know, you can bring it up to C5. Right? So that's the split point. So this is a whole back panel. We now went over that. Split point, it's a little bit complicated here because I think I'll start with dual and then we'll go into more into split. Dual, again, always plays 2 voices at minimum, because you're stacking 2 synths, so it has to borrow 2 voices. And these are not new voices. You only get the maximum here. So if you want to have a bass sound with dual monophonic, you have to cancel these other voices, mute them out, and then you can have your monophonic sound with portamento and things like that. Okay, but if you want to have like a bigger sound that's not monophonic, I really recommend for dual going to like 16 voices, because then you're just reducing half of your polyphonic voices. So like as your notes ring out on the release times and things like that, you're going to be using double the voices. So like to make a regular 8 voice patch, you need 16 voices, because if you're using only 8 and you're using dual, it's like the same as you have a 4 voice patch. So what dual does is it stacks 2 different synthesizers basically with different parameters on top of each other. Now, you have to be a little bit careful here. Let me go back to my just init patch real quick. Go back to dual and go back to 16. Okay. So you can hear, if you slide it to A, which is one patch, you slide it to B, which is the second patch, you can see it by clicking on it. Okay, so like right here, we got like a pulse wave. Okay, and right here, we got a saw wave. There's back to our pulse. All right, and here's our saw. All right, you can also hear there's some release here. Okay. All right. So, oh yeah, I was wondering why is it? This threw me off again with the filter. Why is this so dark, even though the filter is all the way open? Remember, we either do our constant for the frequency, or we do envelope amount to raise it. There we go. Okay. All right. So, like, if we're gonna play back and forth. Now, if we go to our modulation matrix, I can put, for example, mod wheel, and this goes here to part mix. That's a split. So, like, I turn it up, that goes from left to right, and I turn it down, it goes from right to left. Okay, so left to right, and I go back to A. And you can set really different settings. So, for example, I want my B to be like keep in mind, now I got confused here. Oh, why am I hearing B even though this is all the way at A? Because I set my mod wheel routing, so that overrides it. So internally it's routed all the way to B right now. So I'm going to put my mod wheel back down. And now I can do this. I don't have to do the mod wheel. I can also mix them together to create a certain patch. And this is useful, like I've done some key patches, like piano type sounds in my pack and stuff, where, you know, I use kind of like a more muted tone, like here, for example. And keep in mind, you can combine the saw and pulse and you get like a third shape waveform too on one oscillator, but here we go, like for example. And like this, and then here I'm gonna go back to B like that, and then I'm gonna mix it, and you have to fine-tune it, obviously. Oh, what, like you see here, the release is down, that's creating a funky sound. See, if you just played one or the other, you mix it. Right? So you're getting this kind of effect. It's good for different kinds of sounds. Now, I'm going to go into the split right now, and then I'm just going to tell you what to be careful about. So we go into the split mode. Split. What split basically does is it doesn't use two sounds at a time, two voices at a time anymore, it just uses one at a time. But it splits it across the keyboard rather than stacking it on top at the same time. And right now we're split at C4. So remember those two sounds I just put together for that kind of piano-ish sound? Now listen. There's that bottom portion, there's that A. There's that B. And if I only go to A, you're not going to hear B. And I go to B, you're not going to hear A. So that's your volume adjustment. So that's basically all that split does, is it creates this kind of situation. Like it splits up that dual mode. Now what I said you have to be careful about is, like, technically if you read the manual and things like that, it says you can, you know, copy over parameters from A to B, or B to A, and you can, or even from a different patch, like you bring up another instance of Obsession and you go to a patch browser and you copy like a bass and you put it in A, and then you copy a lead and you put it in B, and you go to split and you think, well, oh, I got my bass and my lead. But it's actually not quite so simple, and you might have some issues with that. So it's like you almost have to get certain patches that are made for that. A good way also is like, copy from different split patches or create your own patches and then do it carefully in such a way that it works. Because what happens is this, whenever you're doing dual or split, there's certain things that are different and there's certain things that are the same. And that's where you got to be careful, because what changes, okay, is my oscillators. All the oscillator parameters change. All the filter parameters change. So you get an extra set of 2 oscillators, you get an extra filter, and you get an extra set of 2 envelopes. So all this down here is going to be totally different for A and B, okay? However, there's some things that don't change. Starting here, common master, obviously common, it's not going to change. So if I change my tuning and I go back to here, it's going to stay the same. Okay, doesn't matter. Put on my effects, going to go stay the same. Anything in here is going to stay the same. What else will stay the same? Portamento is going to stay the same. Okay, these two change. Oscillator 2, detune, and X mod. They do change. Okay, like that. All right. Unison stays the same. Okay, LFOs, this one's tricky too. LFOs, like you go here, see, they stay the same. They don't change. You don't get 2 extra LFOs, including here and all that, right? So that's the things that stay the same. Your LFOs, you don't get extra LFOs. Your common stays common, and the controls, that portamento and the unison, stay common. So what can happen is, like, when you copy, like, let's say you put a bass sound and you put a treble sound in B and put a bass sound in A, and you copy it from another patch, you copy something and you paste it. It just basically goes here, copy part, and then here goes paste part, or you can swap parts and so forth. You might see, well, it actually doesn't sound the same, and this threw me off because it's like, what's going on? I copied it here and there, and it's totally different. Why that? Because portamento could be different on your core patch versus the one you just copied into a part. The LFOs could be different. Okay, the unison could be on or off. The tuning could be different. The panning spread and things like that. So you can have some issues sometimes when you copy things over, because really all you're copying is these settings: oscillator, filter, envelopes, detune, X mod, because these are still related to these 2 oscillators particularly. So you're really getting oscillators and filters and envelopes copied, but you're not getting LFOs, you're not getting portamento, like core functions like tuning and spread and things copied. So you have to be careful with that. But basically copying works like this. Like you go to A, let's go back to dual. Oh, I turn on that LFO. Oh, now it's playing 2 at the same time. See, okay, here we go. I got to track down where I set up what. But if I want to just go to A and I click on copy part and I go to B and I go to paste part, see, now I have them both, the same part in both. Okay, and if I do this, now I have B open, A is closed, and that's on dual, and we go to split. Okay, when you go to single mode, B is always just disabled. All you have is A in single mode. So to activate this part B, you go to split or dual. Okay, and again, it's like you got to be careful, because if you were like doing split and you think, well, I'm going to put a portamento on my lead, but I'm not going to put it on my bass, well, you're going to have it on your bass, because the only thing that gets copied over, the only thing that changes is your oscillators, filters, envelopes. core functions like portamento, LFOs, tuning, and things like that, effects, they don't get copied. So you could end up like you copy a patch from another synth, and you can go to another synth and say, well, I'm going to copy A and paste A here, and it's going to sound totally different because you're going to be missing that LFO modulation. You're going to be missing the same portamento, the effects, and other things like that. All you'd be copying is oscillator settings, filter settings, envelope settings. But that can be useful. You just have to know what's happening. Then you don't get lost. So that pretty much covers the whole entire Obsession synthesizer. You can put in the comments whatever you thought. If you have any further suggestions, questions, anything like that, just give me your thoughts, reviews. And just subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be putting out more tutorials, more sound patches, more songs, all kinds of various things. And just subscribe and you're going to get more content. So thanks again for viewing my Obsession tutorial, and I hope everybody has an absolutely wonderful day.